we will immediately apply a 25% surcharge on the electricity we export. We will not hesitate to shut off their power as well. Let me be clear. I will not hesitate to increase this charge. If necessary, if the United States escalates, I will not hesitate to shut the electricity off completely.
Doug Ford isn't waiting. Ontario's Premier sent a strong message to the Americans. The province is moving ahead with a 25% surcharge on electricity exports to several U.S. states.
The lights are still on in New York City tonight, but behind those glowing skyscrapers, a crisis is building that most Americans know nothing about. Right now, at this very moment, 1.5 million American homes and businesses are caught in the middle of an energy standoff that could reshape everything we thought we knew about power in North America. Canada has raised electricity prices on exports to the United States, and the consequences are hitting New York and Boston harder than anywhere else in the country. Let me show you exactly what happened and why this matters to you, even if you don't live in these cities. In January 2026, Canada made a quiet adjustment to the price of hydroelectric power flowing across the border. No press conference, no dramatic announcement, just a technical change in contract terms. But the impact was immediate. New York alone imported 7.7 terawatt-hours of Canadian electricity in 2024, more than any other state, valued at hundreds of millions of dollars. Boston and the broader New England region depend on Canadian imports for roughly 11% of their total electricity load over the past 5 years. That's not a backup supply. That's foundational power keeping hospitals running, keeping subway systems moving, keeping millions of homes heated in winter and cooled in summer. But this energy shock didn't come out of nowhere. It came as retaliation.
Let's get to Canada and its threat to cut off energy exports to the U.S. in retaliation for the Trump tariffs. First one up here is 35, because there are more than 35 major electricity lines on the U.S.-Canadian border. And you think about it, you have 70 oil and gas pipelines. Most of the power, though, goes in one direction.
In February 2025, President Donald Trump announced 25% tariffs on most Canadian goods after a one-month pause. Energy Resources faced a 10% duty. Canada responded immediately with its own 25% retaliatory tariffs on 30 billion Canadian dollars worth of United States imports, targeting dairy products, beverages, plastics, steel, and aircraft parts. Then Ontario Premier Doug Ford took it to another level. He announced a 25% surcharge on electricity exports to the United States, affecting Minnesota, New York, and Michigan directly. Ford didn't mince words. He said, "We will not hesitate to shut off their power as well. I will not hesitate to increase this charge if necessary. If the United States escalates, I will not hesitate to shut the electricity off completely." Think about what that means. Ford wasn't threatening trade restrictions on cars or lumber. He was threatening to turn off the lights for 1.5 million Americans. And he had the infrastructure to do it. Ontario provides critical power to these states through massive transmission corridors that took decades to build. New York's independent system operator is interconnected with Ontario's independent electricity system operator and Hydro-Quebec, allowing imports of up to 4,600 megawatts. The New York ISO itself stated that the United States and Canada share one of the most integrated international electric grids in the world. That integration is now a vulnerability. Here's why New York and Boston can't just flip a switch and buy power from somewhere else. Electricity isn't like oil that you can ship on tankers or natural gas you can store in tanks. Baseload electricity means continuous power running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, regardless of whether the sun is shining or wind is blowing. Canadian hydroelectric power provides exactly that. It's stable, it's reliable, and the infrastructure to deliver it is already locked in place. You can't reroute electricity overnight. The transmission lines are fixed. The regional grids are planned around Canadian supply. Building new power plants would take 5 to 7 years minimum. Expanding renewable capacity doesn't solve the immediate problem because solar and wind can't provide continuous baseload power in these regions yet. The Northeast is trapped by decisions made decades ago. The financial impact hit fast. ISO New England estimated that a 10 to 25% tariff on Canadian electricity could amount to between $66 million and $165 million annually. Those costs don't stay on corporate balance sheets. They get passed directly to consumers. Ford himself estimated the surcharge would add approximately $100 Canadian per month to the bills of each American affected. For households already struggling with inflation from tariffs on imported goods, this isn't just an inconvenience. It's a forced reallocation of budgets. Money that was going to food, healthcare, or savings now goes to keeping the heat on. The people hit hardest are exactly who you'd expect. Retirees living on fixed incomes allocate a larger share of their monthly expenses to utilities and housing. When electricity bills jump by $100 or more, they can't just earn extra income to cover it. They cut spending somewhere else. Older Americans in New York and Boston are making choices between electricity and medication, between heating and eating. That's not hyperbole. That's the documented reality when essential utility costs spike for people with no flexibility in their budgets. Manufacturers are getting crushed too. Energy-intensive industries clustered in the Northeast and Great Lakes regions were already dealing with higher input costs from tariffs. Now their electricity costs are jumping at the same time. Some companies pass costs along to customers. Others reduce output, delay capital investment, or cut overtime hours. Small and medium-sized businesses don't have the hedging capacity of large corporations. For them, this electricity price increase functions like a localized tax that arrived without a legislative vote and offers no relief mechanism. Then there's the technology sector. Data centers, cloud services, artificial intelligence infrastructure, they all require uninterrupted high-quality power. Electricity isn't just an operating cost for these facilities. It's a prerequisite for service reliability. When power prices rise, those costs multiply rapidly across entire digital ecosystems. Eventually, those expenses feed into subscription fees and enterprise contracts throughout the economy. But here's where this gets even more complicated. Doug Ford suspended the electricity surcharge on March 11, 2025 following discussions with United States Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick. It looked like de-escalation. Then the very next day, March 12, Trump doubled tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum to 50%, allegedly in response to Ontario's original electricity move. Canada fired back on March 13 with 25% retaliatory tariffs on $29.8 billion Canadian dollars worth of United States steel, aluminum, and cast iron products. The pattern became clear: tariff announced, retaliation follows, threat escalates, pause negotiated, uncertainty persists, markets adjust, consumers pay, cycle repeats. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission accepted emergency proposals from both the New York Independent System Operator and ISO New England in early March 2025, effective March 1. These filings gave grid operators authority to collect potential import duties on Canadian electricity if directed by federal authorities. Both operators emphasized they believed there are strong legal arguments that electricity should not be subject to tariffs, but uncertainty required preparation. They're now authorized to pass those costs to consumers, and they will if forced to. What makes this so devastating for the United States is that Canada spent years preparing for this moment while Washington assumed Canadian resources would always be available at favorable prices. Canada has been quietly building alternative export relationships with the European Union, Japan, and Asian buyers. When Canadian officials rejected United States demands for long-term preferential energy access, they didn't do it out of spite. They did it because they had already secured buyers willing to pay market rates without the political volatility. Quebec is now considering similar electricity surcharges. If Quebec follows Ontario's lead, the impact on New England doesn't just double, it compounds dramatically because Quebec supplies a massive portion of the region's imported power. The strategic reality is brutal. Canada controls something the United States cannot easily replace. Ford's surcharge generates between 300,000 and 400,000 Canadian dollars per day, which is approximately 208,000 to 277,000 United States dollars daily. That revenue supports Ontario workers, families, and businesses. Meanwhile, American consumers absorb higher costs with no end date in sight. Washington retains political leverage, but operational leverage has shifted to Ottawa. And that's the real crisis facing New York and Boston. This isn't about 1 month's utility bill. This is about who controls the essential infrastructure that modern life depends on, and the uncomfortable answer is that Canada has more control than most Americans ever realized.